This is Right to Life Radio with John Girardi on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400, a production of the Right to Life of Central California. And now, here's your host, John Girardi.
Welcome to Right to Life Radio. As the deep voice man said, I am John Girardi, the director at Right to Life of Central California. And with me today, not Jonathan Keller, for the first half of the show, I have brought on our very good friend, Sissy Dalena Wood. Sissy is a board member at Right to Life of Central California, and more importantly, for the purposes of today's show, Sissy is also the board chair of a new initiative that we have launched out of Right to Life of Central California, a new subsidiary corporation that we've launched called the Obria Medical Clinics of Central California. So, Sissy, welcome to Right to Life Radio.
Thanks, John.
All right. So, I want you to explain to people very briefly what it is that we're doing. We have started this new initiative called the Obria Medical Clinics of Central California. Maybe explain to people what Obria is and why this was an initiative that we wanted to get started to start a prenatal health care clinic here in the Valley.
Right. So, yes, that's exactly what it is, a prenatal care clinic in Central California. We have this vision that we wanted to take care of women. We wanted to take care of women's medical needs. We wanted to give them a place to go where they were provided medical needs with dignity and respect.
But pro-lifers don't care about women. Pro-lifers only care about fetuses. Pro-lifers are, et cetera, et cetera. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So no. And
yeah, so basically we wanted to walk the walk. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's time just to get on the front lines and take care of women and their needs and on every level. Right. So this is not just for their prenatal, this is taking care of the women, their needs and wellness and postnatal.
Right.
So this is a whole body and whole woman care facility.
Right. And, one of the things, as we were sort of thinking about this project, I mean, one of the things we do see, we wound up doing a lot of research on this beforehand. And one of the big gaps we see in healthcare within the San Joaquin Valley is basically the problem of you have such a high population of poor people in the San Joaquin Valley, and we actually have a relatively low number of federally qualified health clinics or primary care clinics that are designed to serve poorer people. And that was a gap that we wanted to basically come in and help bridge that gap. And Obria was basically this national group that wanted to do that. So maybe you can tell our supporters a little bit about Obria, who Obria is and why we chose to work with them.
Yeah, so Obria takes the approach as a medical facility where we're seeing a lot of these wonderful organizations that help women through. They'll have pregnancy tested, they'll give them referrals, but this is an actual medical clinic,
right,
where they're getting medical care.
Right, and that's one of the things for especially for local people who've said, well, what about Pregnancy Care Center? Are you competing with Pregnancy Care Center? Yeah, and they're a great organization. Pregnancy Care Center does basically ultrasounds and pregnancy tests, and then they have lots of great programs for working with women, where there's parenting classes and stuff like that.
So important.
And what we want to do, which we think of as kind of consistent with their work and complementary to their work, is basically, okay, this is purely for medical provision throughout the course of pregnancy and also during delivery. And we sort of, and in that way, we're sort of doing something that's different from them, but very much complementary to them. Yeah. A cornerstone of what we're going to be doing is working with our medical director, Dr. Amy Holmes. So Dr. Amy is a pretty cool gal, and beyond personally being pretty cool, is also a really good doctor. She's an infertility specialist in OBGYN, and one of the great things about working with her is that we'll be able to basically take care of patients all throughout the course of pregnancy. So all of your prenatal exams, well woman exams, various kinds of cancer screenings, STD screenings and treatments, and even to the point, even because she's an OB and we'll be working with some nurse practitioner midwives, we are even going to be able to actually deliver babies through the clinic and working with other local medical partners. So, and that's a really key thing, is being able to do that, but also being able to work with insurance. And maybe, Sissy, you can explain that aspect of it. This is another difference between what Obria does versus your average pregnancy center, is actually being able to accept patients who have insurance.
Sure. And so as we looked into these different ways of setting this clinic up, John and I kind of came to, how are we going to sustain this? How is, especially in today's climate with where donations are and contributions and where medicine's going, where insurance is going, we needed something that we couldn't just rely on donors.
Right.
And so looking at it, we'll accept insurance, and we will also be looking into and accepting Medi-Cal and patients and anything else that will help sustain the services.
Right. And even beyond sustaining, I mean, it's also a thing of meeting women where they are in terms of like, these women have insurance,
right?
And it's not, you're not going to the poorhouse. Like, this is a real clinic. Yeah,
yes.
It's a real clinic that takes your insurance, and that's one of the nice things about it, is that by taking insurance, by sort of operating in this fashion as a more classically like a healthcare clinic, as opposed to, oh, this is a pro-life venture. It kind of gives you a little bit more credibility. It gives you the ability to sort of reach women that you're not otherwise going to reach. And that's kind of a really critical thing. Again, especially considering the vast problems that we see in the San Joaquin Valley.
John, there's a lot of women out there who don't know where to go. They don't know where to turn or who to go to. And we're going to be there for them. Yeah. We're going to be the ones that say, come to us, let us care for you. Let us care for you with dignity. Let us care with love. And let us get you through this in whatever place they are in their lives. We'll get them through it and help them and their families in the future.
Yeah. And that's the really exciting thing about this. I mean, there's so often these criticisms of pro-lifers that basically they just want to talk the talk. They don't actually want to walk the walk. And this actually came out of 40 Days for Life. For me, for the initial idea of it, I was standing outside of Planned Parenthood, and there was this building right next door, and I said, boy, what could we do with this? And I really thought, and I was like, well, maybe it's time to start some new kind of clinic or new sort of something. Now, we did not wind up using the building next to Planned Parenthood. That building actually became our outreach center, oddly enough. Our outreach center, which we have next to Planned Parenthood, from which we interact with women and couples going in and out of Planned Parenthood. But it's kind of neat, and I think it's kind of fortuitous or providential that it was out of that experience of praying and being outside of Planned Parenthood that we got this initial germ of an idea that, maybe there are more ways that we could help people. So it's really cool how that is developed. Now, Sissy, maybe just so we can give folks the timetable, we have just signed a lease. So what is our, just so people can be aware of this venture and when it's coming to Fresno, our time, we have sort of a timetable over the next couple of months. We're going to be building up this property and hiring people. We're going to be hiring staff. We're going to be hiring nursing staff. And there are ways for people to get in touch with us. If you are interested, please get in touch with us at Right to Life of Central California. You can get in touch with us at 559-229-2229. You can also reach out to us at info@rtlcc.org. It's also important to note, though, this is its own 501c3. This is not just Right to Life. This is something new and separate, right?
Right. And John, that's something that I want people to understand. It is new, it's separate. And as you just said, pro-lifers don't always know. They want to be and they want to talk the talk, but a lot want to do the do. And it's not something that they always know how to. So here's an opportunity. Here's an opportunity to be a part of something that's big.
Right.
That's really big and really big for our community. Right. And here we are. We're doing it. We're doing it. And time frame, we're going to start construction soon.
Yeah,
like in the next
June
week.
And July.
Yes. Okay.
June and July.
Next few weeks. Next few weeks.
Yeah.
I guess we're in the middle of May.
Yeah.
Next few weeks, we're going to get that construction going. And I am hopeful by the fall, we are opening our doors to patients and caring for women in our valley.
Right. And it's exciting. I mean, this is a project we've been working on for probably the last 2 years. To close out the segment, one thing I want to mention, we've talked a lot on Right to Life Radio about the future of abortion and telemedicine.
Oh.
And that is a very scary thing that the Biden administration is actually pushing through some regulatory changes recently, is pushing us towards basically the notion of people through telemedicine services, communicating with Planned Parenthood employees, getting a prescription for medication abortion right over the phone, and then, they can have abortion pills mailed to their house.
This is a whole show in its own, Jen.
It is.
Yeah.
We have done shows about this very topic. And the cool thing about Obria is that they are, it's a scary thing for some pro-lifers, because if all you've got is, a pregnancy center and a billboard and a phone number listing in the Yellow Pages, you're out of the game. If they find Planned Parenthood on their phone and download the app, then they have the abortion. We have no chance to interact. Obria's telemedicine services were a big reason why we wanted to go with them. So maybe tell everyone about how Obria is in the telemedicine game.
Sure. And so this was something that a year and a half ago, 2 years, that was being developed, and where everyone, this is so new, and then everybody who was in medicine was forced to this.
Right.
So we have been very well trained and see how it's working in society and with patients and doctors and care providers. And here we are.
Right.
Here we are. And we'll have telemedicine, and it'll be something that we are able to connect with them before
Planned Parenthood does.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's one of the cool things. So the Obria clinics that are located in San Jose, the Real Options Obria clinics, many of whose staff have become friends of ours now. They were so good at their search engine optimization of basically putting together their website and their services such that when you Googled abortion San Jose, they would come up before Planned Parenthood and with better Google reviews. And that's one of the cool parts about working with Obria, is that they're so well structured when it comes to advertising, when it comes to search engine optimization. And by having a telemedicine service, which no other pro-life clinics have, that we can actually capture these people where they are, which is often on their smartphones. That's where these patients are
at any time of the day too.
Right.
So it's something that is will be available at some capacity, that when these women are feeling desperate and are in despair, that will be there for them.
Exactly. And it's so critical, I think, for the pro-life movement to move into this, because that it was sneakily like one of the most important issues of the 2020 election was this I genuinely believe this regulatory change for how abortion pills are regulated, whether they can be shipped in the mail. That is such a, if that becomes normalized nationwide, that changes the whole face of how abortion's provided in the United States.
And John, isn't that so sad and scary for our teenage girls?
I know. And
for our college students.
Yeah.
And not even knowing down the future of the mental health they'll endure.
Right. And even to, when Fresno State started distributing a pill abortion, they basically put in ultrasound machines in every single campus because they were so afraid of the liability. And now we're going to be so reckless with abortion pills, just shipping them off in the mail. No ultrasound beforehand, nothing. So that's another one of the big reasons why we decided to go with Obria and to bring their services to Fresno, is because they're actually, I think, very forward thinking. And that's so important for us as we want to bring this excellent healthcare to the
They're forward thinking. I'm going to agree with you there, but they're also pro-woman. They're pro-woman thinking, and they're thinking about the futures of these women, even with the choices they're making today. They're thinking, how could we get them to make better choices tomorrow, or provide that help they need today?
Yeah.
For the better health of their children down the future.
Exactly.
So it's a pro-woman, pro-life, it's a pro-person organization that we're going to be here in the Valley to serve.
Exactly. It's really exciting. So coming this fall, the Obria Medical Clinics of Central California. Get in touch with us at Right to Life to learn more about it. When we come back, we're going to talk about another great new pro-life initiative that we've established here in the San Joaquin Valley. Sissy will be telling us about the Holy Spouses Memorial of the Unborn in Bakersfield, California. That's next on Right to Life Radio. Back with Right to Life Radio. I'm joined by Right to Life board member and our guest on today's show, Sissy Dalena Wood. Thank you, Sissy, again, for being on the show. Now, we're going to talk about, Sissy, you seem to have lots of things that you are on the board of and lots of projects that you are working on. So today's show this is the Sissy Show. We're basically doing lots of your pro-life projects. Yeah, this is a bunch of your pro-life projects that we're going to be talking about today. So another one of these projects, which we wanted to highlight from Right to Life Central California, is the Holy Spouses Memorial of the Unborn, which is down in Bakersfield. So maybe tell us a little bit about what this project is and how the idea got started.
Okay, yeah. So this project is something that was a vision of Father Larry down in Bakersfield.
Larry Tashi, yes.
Yes, Larry Tashi.
And some of our local listeners, especially if you're from Madera, you'll know Father
St.
Larry
Joachim's,
because he was the
yes.
pastor at St. Joachim's, and now he's the pastor at Our Lady of Guadalupe in Bakersfield.
Yes.
So.
And you know what Father Larry did? He listened and he heard and he felt these mothers of mothers hit from miscarriages. He felt their pain. He saw their grief. And he knew he needed to provide something to help them.
Right.
So this project was 7 years in the making. And he decided that this was going to be the healing point for women.
Right.
And it's a memorial that memorializes miscarriages. It memorializes repentant abortions. And it also is a place where you can entomb your miscarried child.
Oh, wow.
If the remains are available.
Right.
So it's a very beautiful garden. It is surrounded with a statue of Saint Joseph and Mary holding an infant that has
been miscarried.
Yes, and that is there. It's very. It is very dignified. It's a place where healing is happening.
Right. Well, and that's one of the things, some of the research that we've done for pro-life work is that one of the things that the terminology that gets used, why so many women experience suffering after abortion, is this sort of unacknowledged grief, unacknowledged or basically not dealt with grief that society basically is not willing to acknowledge through the normal sort of rites and ceremonies and processes that we go through. When you lose a loved one, what do? You have a time of mourning that society kind of acknowledges. They give you time off work. You have people who comfort you, come over, who make meals, who love you. You have public rites of mourning that provide closure, things like funerals and things like that. Whereas with miscarriage and abortion, these things kind of don't. You have this sort of unrecognized grief where it's like you're silent about it and you're not allowed, almost like you're not allowed to do something with it. And this provides a forum really for women to do that. And that's such an important thing, I think, mental health wise.
John, exactly. So it's a silent suffering.
Yeah.
It's a grief that is lonely. And it's something that mothers and women feel a lot of times guilt and shame and other feelings that come along with this.
Sure.
It is a pain that does not go away.
Right.
Especially, I've had women in their 80s and 90s tell me stories and show me their grief from babies they've lost 60, 70 years ago.
Right. Well, and that's the thing we always remark upon with Rachel's Vineyard is, and sometimes not even just with women, it's also with men. Like, I had a part, I had some kind of role one way or another with an abortion 50 years ago. Should I have said, and we'll even have men express this to us, like, should I have done more? Should I have, I said, well, I'll stand by whatever choice you make, but should I have done more? Should I have done this? So the idea of setting up a memorial like this, I think is so important because, as you say, it allows you to take some of that suffering that is internalized and in some way know that it's being acknowledged and recognized. Yeah.
So, yes. And a mother never forgets her child.
Of course.
And it's something that this gives an opportunity to memorialize that child, to put a plaque. We have available plaques to name your child, to have a date or something you want to say on the plaque. And then we also have the area and the wall for the repentant abortions. And that also you have an opportunity to name your baby. Because those babies were just as important and brought just as much suffering to those mothers as it did for a miscarriage.
Right.
And anybody who's had a miscarriage carries that in their heart forever.
Right. Well, even, and it's even that's actually one cool thing that I read about. There's something, I'm probably butchering all the biology of this, and anyone who actually knows anything about biology will correct me, but that for every pregnancy a woman experiences, there's certain kinds of genetic information from their child that's actually enters the mother's body in some way, shape, or form. So you literally have a piece of, every woman actually has a piece of her child as part of her body for the rest of time. So, and for us for myself as a Catholic, it's neat to have this at Our Lady of Guadalupe church, and sort of the thought that Mary, biologically speaking, had some part of Jesus as part of her body, actually, for the rest of her life. So, again, Sissy, thank you so much for joining us. Sissy, where can people who are maybe interested in taking advantage of the Memorial of the Unborn, where can they go to get more information?
Well, you could definitely get a hold of me through the Right to Life here at Central California.
Right.
And they'll connect you with somebody here in Fresno, me, but also on Our Lady Guadalupe's website, which is guadalupebakersfield.org. And they, under ministry, will be the Memorial of the Unborn.
Okay.
You could find forms for the plaques there.
Okay.
You could find phone numbers there to call and to have any discussion you want. And also, we have the availability, these two beautiful women in Bakersfield, Rosa Figueroa and Sandra Garcia, do a ministry that is a support group.
Oh, wonderful.
And so through this whole last year and a half, they've brought it to Zoom.
Oh, great.
And so it's not just limited to people in Bakersfield.
Oh, good.
And it's both in English and Spanish.
Good.
And this is something that that has been a beautiful thing for women who actually have been home alone during this last year and a half and have been able to have that support.
Right.
So this is, the forms again are on the website.
Okay.
The information to call Virginia in the office there, and she'll guide you to whatever you need or more information. And there's also a donation button on there.
Hey, there you
go. Here it
Okay.
is. And that anybody who wants to be involved in that way and to support somebody who may not be able to afford to bury their child there, entomb their child at the memorial, this would be a way to sponsor and to be a part of it.
All right, wonderful. Okay, well, thank you so much, Sissy. Again, the Holy Spouses Memorial of the Unborn in Bakersfield, California, a great and worthy life-affirming ministry. We'll be back with more Right to Life Radio right after this. Right to Life Radio, thank you all so much for listening. A production, as always, of Right to Life of Central California. All right. So our thanks to Sissy Dalena Wood for joining us for the first two segments of the show to talk about those awesome things that she has been working on, our Obria medical clinics of Central California, as well as the Cemetery of the Innocents in Bakersfield, California. We now have to talk about the big news of this week, the huge abortion news of this week, and probably when Jonathan Keller's in on next week, we'll talk about this in a bit more depth. The Supreme Court has agreed to hear a new case on abortion, and it is likely to be the most important abortion case in the last 30 years. Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization. Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization. Dobbs v. Jackson. Let's learn the name, because this is going to be the most important abortion case probably of the last 30 years. Basically, the case centers around a law in Mississippi. The case comes from Mississippi, and the state of Mississippi passed a law basically banning all abortions 15 weeks into pregnancy, 15 weeks and onward, okay? So that's well in the second trimester, but it's before fetal viability. And as a result, this law very squarely and clearly contradicts all of the Supreme Court's prior controlling abortion jurisprudence in not so much Roe v. Wade, but Planned Parenthood versus Casey. Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which is really today, more so than Roe v. Wade, our controlling abortion legal regime under which we've been living for the last 30 years since 1992 when Casey was introduced. So I want to just explain what a big deal this is. This is the case, I think, in which Roe v. Wade could be overturned. So let me just sort of explain why that's a big deal, and maybe give people a better sense of what Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey do. One of the consistent things we see in public opinion polling about Roe v. Wade is that people are very supportive of Roe v. Wade, but they are not supportive of the specific things that Roe v. Wade requires. People are supportive of Roe v. Wade, but then they also support policies that Roe v. Wade has rendered unconstitutional. And I think what that really betrays is that people don't really understand Roe v. Wade, and they don't understand Planned Parenthood versus Casey, and they don't understand just how radical and extreme this regime of abortion law is that Roe and Planned Parenthood versus Casey and also Doe versus Bolton created. So let me explain what they do. I mean, let's start with the final summary of what they do. Between Roe v. Wade, Doe v. Bolton, which is Roe's sister case, decided on the same day, and then Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which is Roe's sort of successor case from 1992. These three cases in conjunction with each other basically mean that in the United States of America, neither the U.S. Congress nor any state legislature can ban abortion for any period of pregnancy. It is impossible to just say, we ban all abortions from this point onward, or we ban all abortions from this point onward to save the mother's life. We cannot impose a restriction like, okay, at the halfway point of pregnancy, 20 weeks onward, no more abortions. We can't impose something that says from fetal viability onward, no more abortions. We can't impose something that says from the end of the first trimester onward, no more abortions. From fetal heartbeat, from the time that a fetus can detect pain, no more abortions. We cannot pass any laws like that. Why? Because Roe v. Wade, Planned Parenthood versus Casey purport to be interpreting the Constitution. They purport to be interpreting specifically the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. The 14th Amendment to the Constitution has one clause in it called the Due Process Clause. And in this section of the Constitution, it says that no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Now, at first blush, you hear that and think, no state can deprive someone of life without due process of law? Oh, that seems like that should be like a pro-life thing, shouldn't it? No. The way that the Supreme Court interpreted that phrase, which is called the Due Process Clause, no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. In the 20th century, some of the more liberal members of the Supreme Court took that phrase, due process, and came up with this notion called substantive due process. This idea that a protection for due process, which is protecting procedures, right? It's got the word process in it. And let's remember the context in which the 14th Amendment was enacted. The 14th Amendment was enacted right after the Civil War. And there were three constitutional amendments that the North imposed upon the Southern states as a precondition for them being readmitted to the Union. If you were a defeated Southern state and you wanted back in the Union, you had to ratify the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, the 15th Amendment, which gave former slaves citizenship and the right to vote, and you had to enact the 14th Amendment, which had a number of different kinds of civil liberty protections that applied to everybody, including black people. And one of those was the Due Process Clause. No one shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. And let's look at those words again. We're not just saying highfalutin, fancy words because it sounds like noble or something. No state shall deprive anyone of life. That means execute them without due process of law, without fair judicial proceedings. No state shall deprive anyone of liberty without due process of law. Can't throw me into jail unless you give me a fair trial. No state shall deprive anyone of property without due process of law. Again, state can't fine you, can't, make you civilly liable in a civil lawsuit, whatever, without due process of law. And basically what the North was saying to the South was, hey, you Southern states, we'll let you back in the Union, but you can't have two systems of justice, one for white people, one for black people. Okay? And your judicial systems within your state governments have to meet certain basic thresholds of fairness. All right? Out of that constitutional requirement imposed by the federal government on the states, the justices on the Supreme Court in the 20th century began to derive substantive rights, not procedural protections, but substantive rights, one of which was a right to privacy. Basically, the theory that the justices of the Supreme Court had were, well, in order for due process to exist in America, certain kinds of rights or values have to be legally protected under this same Constitution, under this same constitutional provision. So we're going to say that, well, there's a right to privacy that sort of emanates from here. Now, certain private things are protected by the Constitution. The Fourth Amendment says that the cops can't search your home without a warrant. Gives you protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. There's some private-ish things that get protected by the First Amendment. And, the Third Amendment says British, soldiers can't be quartered in your house. So there are private things that the Constitution protects, but a right to privacy, just this big, floating, vague thing, is not explicitly protected in the language of the Constitution. And all kinds of things that we would consider private had been regulated by the states for forever. Many states, in fact, I think the state of Virginia still has on the books a law prohibiting adultery. Okay, private, intimate decisions have been regulated by governments for a while. So the Supreme Court read into this procedural protection of the 14th Amendment a right to privacy, and then read into that, in Roe v. Wade, a right to abortion. In Planned Parenthood versus Casey, it looked particularly at the word, no one shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And Justice Kennedy, who was writing for he sort of helped out in writing the controlling plurality opinion, he basically thought that something that was at the heart of liberty was a mother's own ability to decide for herself when human life in the womb began, which is kind of an absurd thing. But this was a legal reasoning of the justices on the Supreme Court. And beyond just reading a right to privacy into the Constitution that I don't think is there, beyond a vague, big, amorphous right to privacy as opposed to specific private things, beyond reading a right to privacy in the Constitution, beyond reading a right to abortion in the Constitution, the justices, these liberal justices on the Supreme Court, also read different structures for how abortion ought to be regulated that are allegedly within the Constitution. And in 1992's decision, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, the court read a dividing line between fetuses that are and are not viable. Again, this is nowhere in the Constitution. This is just a line that seemingly Justice Kennedy and Justices O'Connor and Souter just sort of drew. And basically, the holding from Planned Parenthood versus Casey is that state governments and the U.S. Congress cannot ban abortion prior to fetal viability. And they cannot impose any undue burdens to a woman's ability to get abortions in that time. So more or less, any abortions chosen before a fetus is viable, which, depending on your NICU, depending on how healthy your baby is somewhere around 21, 22, 23 weeks. 24 weeks. So prior to that time, a right to abortion is more or less inviolate. Now, after fetal viability, states may ban abortion, but they need to have an exception for pregnancies where the mother's health is implicated. And the Supreme Court case that defined health, Doe versus Bolton, it defined health so broadly that literally every pregnancy implicates a mother's health. And so the combination of Roe and Casey and Doe versus Bolton is effectively that no state can ban abortion, or the federal government, through the U.S. Congress, can ban abortion as such. They can impose certain kinds of health and safety and informed consent requirements. The U.S. Congress was able to ban partial birth abortion as one particularly gruesome method of late-term abortion when other methods are available. But we cannot ban abortion as such. And this new case that the Supreme Court is going to hear, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, is asking this the question that is before the court, the single legal question that the court is actually deciding is, are all pre-viability limitations on abortion unconstitutional? Because that's what's at issue here. Mississippi has a law in place that bans all abortion after the 15-week point in pregnancy. 15 weeks is well before the point of fetal viability. So we have to ask ourselves, and that's not even, so 15 weeks, that's into the second trimester, all right? And this is sort of the heart of the heart of the problem with Planned Parenthood versus Casey and Roe v. Wade, I've heard people ask things like, well, why can't we just pass a law and make abortion illegal? It's because Planned Parenthood versus Casey and Roe v. Wade were purporting to interpret the Constitution and purporting to say that the Constitution mandates that abortion must be legal for all 9 months of pregnancy for any reason. You can't just pass a normal law that contradicts the Constitution, all right? The Constitution says there's a right to free exercise of religion. If I pass a law in the California legislature saying it's illegal to be a Presbyterian, well, that law is unconstitutional. It's null and void. It's unenforceable. It'll get struck down by the courts. That's the problem, is if this new case, Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, if this new case is decided correctly, as I pray that it will, it takes the handcuffs off of every state in the union. It takes the handcuffs off of every state in the union to allow them to pass reasonable abortion restrictions. Any reasonable abortion restrictions they want, to ban abortion outright if they wish, to ban it after 6 weeks, after 20 weeks, after 12 weeks. It takes the handcuffs off of state legislatures. We'll dig into this topic, this critically important new Supreme Court case. How will the court rule? Stay tuned to find out right here on Right to Life Radio. Phil Spector and that wall of sound. This is the Crystals with Da-Do Ron Ron. I love how the reason why her heart stood still was purely because his name was Bill. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to Right to Life Radio, a production, as always, of Right to Life of Central California, rtlcc.org. As we discuss this new Supreme Court case, Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, the Supreme Court has announced this past Monday that they are going to take this case, which is probably is the vehicle for overturning Roe v. Wade, the best vehicle we've had perhaps ever. And this is going to be, I think this is the moment. I think this is the moment when we can finally overturn Roe v. Wade and turn abortion decision-making at least over to the states. My wish is that we could simply recognize the right to life as being a part of our Constitution itself. Unfortunately, I don't know how realistic of an outcome that is. Now, what is going to be the outcome of this case? I being Mr. Pro-Life here in Fresno, what is going to be the outcome of this critically important abortion case? I'm not 100% sure, but I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic for a couple of reasons. Now, if Justice Barrett had not been nominated to the Supreme Court, I would be much less optimistic. I don't know that John Roberts I don't know that he has it in him to actually overturn Roe v. Wade. I don't know that he has it in him to actually overturn Planned Parenthood versus Casey. I still have some concerns about the other new members of the court. I don't exactly know how Justice Gorsuch is going to treat this issue. I don't know exactly how Justice Kavanaugh is going to treat this issue. I have some good confidence in Justice Barrett and certainly in Alito and Thomas. But I have pretty good optimism. And I think the key person in this whole thing is Brett Kavanaugh. Since Justice Barrett joined the court, every court kind of has its center of gravity. It's 9 people. So there's usually one person who's kind of in the middle. For years, that person was Anthony Kennedy. For about a year or two in between Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, that person was John Roberts. And since Justice Ginsburg has been replaced with Justice Barrett, it's kind of moved the political center or legal center of the court one click over away from John Roberts, and I think it's really Justice Kavanaugh in the middle. He's sort of the most gettable conservative vote in a sense. He's the justice who's most often in the majority. And I think his viewpoints on this are going to be critical. Now, Justice Kavanaugh gave a speech in 2017 where he was talking about a case called Glucksberg versus Washington. This was a case about whether or not, as we discussed in the last segment, America's abortion jurisprudence comes out of this notion that the 14th Amendment Due Process Clause, which says that no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. America's abortion jurisprudence is premised on the idea that some rights have to exist in society in order for due process to exist more broadly. One of those rights, these liberal justices reasoned, was privacy, and out of that right to privacy was a right to abortion. That kind of reasoning is something that Kavanaugh thoroughly and indeed explicitly rejected in a 2017 article talking about Glucksberg versus Washington. Now, this Glucksberg versus Washington could have been the Roe v. Wade of physician-assisted suicide, and it was not. Like, imagine if Roe v. Wade had been correctly decided. That's more or less what happened in Glucksberg. In Glucksberg, then Chief Justice Rehnquist said, look, we can't create new rights out of the 14th Amendment unless these rights are deeply rooted in American history and legal tradition, as well as being essential to ordered liberty. And by that standard, that particular grounding of something being essential to American historical legal tradition, Kavanaugh, by embracing that, I think makes it very clear that he would never have ruled with, Justice Kennedy in Planned Parenthood versus Casey. He would have never ruled with the majority in Roe v. Wade. He would have never created those rights to begin with. So unless Justice Kavanaugh is just a total coward who won't do what he knows to be the right thing out of some sense of keeping the status quo, I think there's a very good chance that he will join a conservative majority to overturn Roe v. Wade and let every state start regulating abortion as they see fit. That'll do it for Right to Life Radio, folks. We will see you next week with more on this new exciting Supreme Court case. Stick around. God bless.